Welcome to the Bassline. Dr. Kat Lindley is one of the right docs of history. She is one of the courageous doctors who stood up to say, stop the shots when toxic mRNA jabs were rolled out. She has been outspoken about the threat posed by the WHO and the United Nations. It is with resounding gratitude that I welcome back to the Bassline Dr. Kat Lindley. How are you this morning, Dr. Lindley?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Awesome. How's the weather in your part of Texas?
It's pretty nice.
Excellent. Well, let me just make a couple of quick announcements for our audience, and then we're going to launch right into this interview. We have another 528 frequency jam session scheduled at Rock Mill Fitness. That's 274 Lenox Avenue. Come soak up the rhythm in the 528 frequency. That's 3:30 p.m. at 274 Lenox Avenue, Rock Mill Fitness. We've had a great time every time we've gotten together, and we'd really love for you to join us. Of course, the way you can support this program is by going to jeremiahhosea.com, by the theme song of this show. Please go to my Substack and subscribe. If you could be a paid subscriber, that's phenomenal. If you can't, please be a free subscriber right away. And also, please subscribe to the new Bassline podcast, which has been uploaded to YouTube. They haven't censored us so far. So please become a subscriber over there, share the interviews. And of course, I'm a chess coach, so remotelearningchess.com. Contact me for a chess lesson today. I'd love to teach you from scratch or give you some new ideas to play around with, looking at historical games, contemporary games. And yeah, please partake in the game of kings and the king of games. But all that being said, we have an incredible guest joining us once again. Dr. Kat Lindley is outspoken. She's courageous. She's a straight shooter, very rational, very measured. I like to say, I don't know why that analogy or that adjective comes to mind when I think of you, Dr. Lindley. I say very measured, but I think it's a great attribute considering the serious nature of what you discuss. Now, you were one of the doctors and one of the people, I would say, at the forefront of warning people about the WHO pandemic treaty. And you were very consistent about that. Give us an update about that whole situation, because I remember when Trump came into office, there was this announcement that we're being withdrawn from the WHO. And I'm saying, okay, that's great. But then it seemed like there was some other additional paperwork or something that was going on that was lingering, that we weren't in the clear yet in terms of this treacherous organization. So where do we stand with the WHO pandemic treaty and all of that stuff that we were concerned about not too long ago?
So the World Health Organization passed the amendments to international health regulation last year. And then this year they passed the pandemic agreement, pandemic treaty or accord agreement, whatever the name ends up being. Now, as far as we are concerned, President Trump issued an executive order in January 20th, I don't know, 28th or 21st, that we will withdraw from the World Health Organization, but the process itself takes a year. So you have to give it give a formal withdrawal letter, and then it takes a year to actually be withdrawn. So we are on track to be out of the World Health Organization in January of next year.
Okay, so that's good news, basically.
It is, but there are nuances to this because obviously they're going ahead with it. They're sharing the pathogen system amongst the member countries. There is this issue where they say we're going to have new pandemics and new issues, so how we're going to respond. The United States gives them a lot of money, so that's going to be an issue that they will have to address. And for people who say we need to be in there so that we know what's going on, yes or no, because in a sense, if something does happen, you can collaborate between countries and try to figure out how to respond to another issue. The biggest problem with the World Health Organization is the corruption. So, people are saying we need to stay in and we need to do reform from the inside out. That's going to be very difficult because this has been entrenched with the United Nations for a very long time, and they keep on pushing the same agenda. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in January of next year. We do have Office of Global Affairs in HHS that's supposed to be in charge of this. So we will have to see how they will handle any new health emergencies that come our way.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Now, I was personally curious, what is your story in terms of your personal evolution of realizing that the United Nations is a nefarious entity? I mean, I grew up sort of thinking, well, the United Nations symbolizes sort of like an attempt at world peace, that it's a civilizing element in the world, and that it's generally a good thing. And I've become very suspicious, to say the least, of the United Nations. I have a totally different perspective about that organization, particularly from speaking to you, speaking to Dr. Rima Lebeau. And I am very concerned about what the United Nations is actually up to, what it actually represents. I mean, did you grow up with a negative attitude about the United Nations? It's something that you discovered? I mean, what was your process in terms of realizing that the United Nations was not this wonderful institution that it's portrayed to be?
I would think that most people used to think that United Nations was there for doing good, and the same for World Health Organization, and maybe initially that was the purpose for it. But I think over COVID pandemic, we have seen, especially with the World Health Organization, this need for control, this idea that we need to be, one world, one government, issuing vaccine passports, things like that. And then when you look at the United Nations, that's kind of like all evolved from the Agenda 2030 and the plans that United Nations has. And according to some of the things in Agenda 2030, the climate change is a big deal with them, controlling the industrialization of the countries based on the climate change, or this idea of 15-minute cities, controlling the food supply. There, and if you listen to the Secretary General of United Nations last year, at some point he said that we need this global governance, right? And you need all the countries to kind of collaborate together and work together under this global governance way of looking at the world. And they have something called Pact for the Future that essentially expands the Agenda 2030. And a lot of it, if you read that their documents, there's a lot of stuff about over-sexualization of children, the control of food supply, culling of animals because they're of supposedly outbreaks and things like that. And I think we've learned through COVID that what they call an outbreak is based on data that's really not true, because even looking at like PCR and things like that, right? They're using testing that's really not meant to be used that way, and you can inflate the numbers any way you want, and then you come with this product and essentially mandate the world to have it. I would say that the mission for most people is to be free, take care of their family, have meaningful relationships, have a good job, provide, and live essentially a happy life without too much interference from the government. And what you've seen with the pandemic is not only the government interfering, but these supra global agencies that should have no say on what's happening in our countries.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. And I'd like to shift the discussion over to something that we've kept track of for the entire history of this program. This is actually episode 118 of the Bassline in 118 weeks. And we've tried to continually stay on the topic of the COVID injections and the harm that they have done and the way they were used to violate our rights. And I just wonder, as a matter of fact, we were talking about this on Stop the Shots last night. We were referring back to that incredible original video where so many great doctors, such as yourself, stood up and said, "Stop the shots." And that was years ago by now. And there was so many intelligent people, highly credentialed people stepping up to say, stop the shots years ago by now. I mean, there have been petitions signed, there have been conferences. How do you visualize breaking through, basically? I mean, one of the most amazing things about everything that's happened during COVID is the ability to silence thousands and thousands of doctors. I'd like to think in a sane world that if one credible doctor has a concern, it would be addressed by the medical community. But here you have a situation where you have thousands of doctors being completely ignored, contradicted, even character assassinated at certain points. I mean, what would be done to make a breakthrough where it's acknowledged that what has happened with these injections?
Well, I think since we haven't made a breakthrough with the new administration and the current Secretary of HHS that was in favor of stopping the shots at some point, I don't think that we ever will. And that's a concern, because if you have a product that some doctors think it's causing damage, the ethical agencies should look at it and issue warnings, or do a moratorium, or completely stop it. You know, they've done these announcements where, like, okay, we're taking them off for all healthy people, but children and pregnant women who have underlying disease can still get it if they discuss it with their doctor. Well, if you are obese, that can be considered an underlying illness that qualifies you to get the COVID shot. And if your doctor thinks you should get it, they can recommend it. Or if you're asthmatic, the same thing. And I think it's very concerning, this thing that we're not acknowledging the extent of damage that we're seeing. And if you bring it up, then you're like, well, you are a wacko and you don't know what you're talking about, right? Even if I'm not right about it, let's say I wasn't right about it, you should be concerned and prove me wrong. Because if you don't prove me wrong, you have life at stake. And it seems that life has become a currency that they're willing to trade in to gain certain things. And, you know, it's very difficult to know why these things are happening. Is it the influence of pharma? Is it the influence of organizations like WHO? Is it something else? I don't know. From my point, I don't even care why. From my point of view, I see people suffering from it. It needs to be addressed. And, you know, you have lots of vaccine injured who are not getting the healthcare that they need. They have to pay out of pocket. We don't have a code specifically for this injury. So there's a lot of things that are happening in this world where they're still being ignored. And it's very difficult for them to, you know, see HHS make announcements about removing red dye out of cereal, or this dye, or, you know, all these announcements that are like little wins. And it's like, yeah, we need to like remove the seed oil, but you have an option of going to the store and not buying it. You really do, you know. So I'm not sure that the administration is addressing this as seriously as they should. And
Yeah.
is it going to change? I don't really have hope for it.
Sound pessimistic, but it's also pretty realistic, unfortunately.
That's where we are, right? They've had since January of this year to really show us what they will do. And they keep on saying, well, it's a political game. You have to understand it, and this and that. If you don't have courage to do it, then just resign from the job. Essentially, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. Now, you mentioned women and you mentioned pregnant women and babies, and it's occurred to me through all of this stuff, and I'm curious about your thoughts about this, which is I've come to the conclusion, and I have no expertise in any of this. I have no power in any of this in terms of affecting any of these policies, but just as a citizen, it occurred to me how troubling it was when I hear people say, well, we haven't tested this on pregnant women yet, or we haven't tested this on children yet. And I'm thinking, can we reconsider the concept of the clinical trial? Is there a way to move away from human experimentation and still have medications and things that we need? Because it strikes me that there's something very unethical in the first place about what we're calling the clinical trial. Is that a crazy thing that I'm saying, or is there something to that maybe?
Yes and no. You have to have some sorts of trial to see how something's going to affect the population, right? And that's why sometimes they will do trials on animals that are genetically closest to the human. Um, I'll have medication that I give to one patient and then I give to another patient. I have completely different profile on the patient, right? One will respond one way, the other one will respond differently. So some of those things have to be taken in account when you are having a drug or a product come to the market. I think the concern is the fact that we're saying it's safe in pregnancy. We really don't have enough data to show that it's safe. If anything, we have data to show that we should be concerned. And, you know, pregnant women, we tell them not to eat cheese that's not pasteurized. We tell them they cannot take over-the-counter medication other than just a very small list of medications they can take. But with this product, we told them it's safe and you can do it. I think that's what the concern is, the fact that we have no data behind it and we're saying it's safe. And at this point, everyone knows it's not safe, or I would hope they know it's not safe. But it is what it is.
Now, in terms of just the general subject of human health, what could you say about the over medicating of society in general? I mean, isn't it true that Americans take more painkillers, more antipsychotics, more antidepressants? I mean, aren't we becoming a medicated society to an unbelievable extent? I mean, is there a way to reverse that somewhat? Wouldn't it be a good idea to try to engage in more preventative health care rather than this endless pharmacology? What do you think about that?
Well, that's an interesting question, and you're not going to like my answer because I'm not going to cut out to people that want to listen to this. This is my favorite thing on X. Everyone blames doctors.
Yeah.
Doctors don't know how to do this. Doctors don't know how nutrition. Doctors don't know this. Doctors don't know that, this and that. Sure, there's an element of that for sure. But it's also a demand, right? People go to the doctor, they want to lose weight. You ask them, have you tried doing anything? No, I want a pill for it. Why? Because it's easy. They don't want to go to the gym and exercise. They don't want to go eat healthy because it costs a lot of money to eat healthy and it actually requires time to cook the meal and not eat frozen foods or fast food, right? So there is this relationship between if the doctor doesn't give you what you want, you're going to write a bad review. It's a bad doctor. Doctor's employment has to do with these reviews. They get called into the office for that and all stuff. So there's this whole circle where you have created a supply and demand type of a thing. Patient want it. Doctors don't want to necessarily spend too much time on it. They agree to it. It's easy. And now you have also this dichotomy of mistrust in medicine. And we're finally waking up to this idea that we are over medicated. And it's true, we are. And how do you solve that? You actually take care of yourself. You sleep better, you eat better, you exercise, you drink water, you go out in the sun, you reduce your stress, you don't go on X or watch TV late and things like that. Those are all the things you can do at home to actually get your body in better metabolic state. And then maybe you're not going to need antidepressant, maybe you're not going to need a diabetic medication or a statin or a blood pressure medicine because you've done all those things to make sure that you're healthy. So there needs to be accountability on both sides. It is the healthcare community because that has been kind of education and someone has this where there's a pill for that. And there's also a patient who doesn't want to do the work to get themselves healthy because there is a pill for that. So you have to address both sides of this equation. You can't blame one and not say to this one, well, you have your part in it as well. But yes, the answer is yes, we are over medicated, we are over dependent of pharma, and that also has to do with the food supply that we're getting. If when I go to Europe, I can eat essentially really what I want without gaining weight or worrying about my blood glucose or anything like that, because the ingredients are fresh. You don't worry about preservatives and stuff like that. And this is where Maha is actually winning. They're getting rid of lots of these things. But I'm just saying we cannot call this a win without addressing the elephant in the room, which currently is the mRNA shot. You have to do those two things together. And you need to address the over-prescribing of SSRIs and the metabolic medications, a lot of these things. But this is also where I say consumer has to look at themselves in the mirror and recognize that they are also part of the problem. And I probably won't be liked for this, but
No, well, I think you make a really great point. I mean, people might not like it, but I don't see how people could completely deny the validity of what you're pointing out there. I would love to shift the discussion slightly in terms of the discussion of family, actually. We've discussed this the past couple of weeks. Actually, you're my third European guest in a row, although you're a European American at this point. But I spoke to the family man, Jeremy Poole, who's from Wales, but now resides in Spain. And last week I spoke to Ivor Cummins, who resides in Ireland. And we discussed family. And I would love to hear from a mother's perspective some of the concept of the family. And I'm here in New York, so I'm sure the landscape is a lot different than where you are in Texas. And I noticed a lot of different things. I mean, for example, with the whole sort of LGBTQ agenda, if you will, here in New York, it seems they want this LGBTQ flag, which was modified. I don't know if you recall that the previous administration added the triangle to the rainbow flag, which was also supposed to acknowledge transgenderism. And they held this over the White House. And it's become here in New York, it's sort of a pervasive thing where they seem to want this flag in every classroom. I'm monitoring it in my children's schools. I don't think they've had that kind of content presented to them. I hope not. I don't think so, in terms of in the curriculum, in terms of the teacher discussing these things. But it's always framed in terms of if you object to this agenda, then they want to label you as homophobic or transphobic or whatever. And I look at it differently. I'm saying I'm a parent who doesn't want my child or children predisposed to sexual content, period. So I don't want them discussing homosexual, heterosexual, or whatever, because they're young children and they don't know what sex is. And they're not supposed to, as far as I'm concerned. They have time to get to that subject when their minds are even alerted to it. But it seems to me, rather than saying it's about the pro agenda or anti, to me, I look at it as it's a question of parents having any say in how their children are educated, what they are exposed to. And it's being faced with this opposition of people who are saying, no, we're going to overrule you as parents. We've decided that this is something that your children need to be subjected to. And I'd just love to hear from your point of view as a mother, as someone who resides in Texas, how do you view what some would call the attack on the family and how things are going in regard to the contemporary family in the United States and in the world?
So some of that actually comes from also UN Pact for the Future. You have this whole idea even President Biden at one point said that our children are his children and things like that. You have government who wanted to be the parent. And then we had a shift in election and things have changed. But as far as the family and what can we do as parents, you have to be involved, right? You need to go to the school board meetings. You need to ask your children what type of material they're learning at school, because you never know what's happening. And it's really important to really be involved and make sure that the kids have a safe environment where they can discuss these things with you. I think, and that was kind of one good thing that happened during COVID. You know, if you take lockdowns aside, what happened is parents were listening to the Zoom and learning that their kids are getting exposed to materials that shouldn't be exposed. And that's where you had this whole movement of parents, even in Virginia, where essentially they helped a governor win the elections because the parents started showing up to the school boards and talking about these things that they didn't want the children exposed to. I do think that we are over sexualizing our children. Also, they're younger and younger, again, having to understand life. So I think the most important thing we can do as parents is protect them as much as we can, and also teach them how to survive in this world.
Yeah, nice. So I would love to talk about your private practice model as a doctor. I remember we discussed that previously, and I found that very interesting and encouraging as well. And I wonder if there's a way that we, the public, can help support a shift towards a different medical model where we would wind up with a competent doctor that we can trust, such as yourself, and establish sort of more of a personal relationship with our healthcare provider. Is there a way that the people can support innovative doctors such as yourself in terms of supporting these models and shifting away from generic uh, insurance industry driven sort of model that we've fallen into?
So I am a direct primary care doctor, which essentially means that I have membership that's based on age, and it allows patients access to me 24/7, whether it's text, messaging, calls, videos, or coming to the office. They can come one time or 10 times in a month. They still pay the same price. And it creates this environment where patient and doctor know each other well. They can learn about each other's tendencies, and it creates environment of trust, and it makes it easier for both the practitioner and the patient to get what they need. It's a cash-based practice. And also through this model, lots of times I'll teach my patients that if they need x-rays or labs, even if they have insurance, sometimes it will be cheaper to actually pay cash. President Trump generally likes this type of practice, and in his previous administration, he's done a lot of work with this. And his recent announcements that patients should kind of get their own money and shop for healthcare also has to do a lot with this type of a model. I'm a firm believer that market will always correct itself, free market. Because if you have a doctor like me in my community and someone there as well, we have to compete for the same patient, which means that our prices will go down, but our quality will go up because we're competing for the same patient. So I think you really need a little bit of healthy competition in this environment for patients to find a doctor that fits for them. The current healthcare system is essentially making patients to be slaves because you have to go to a doctor that your insurance covers, whether you like them or not. And sometimes you may hate the doctor in the office, but you're like, I have to go to them to get a script to go see a specialist that I like. So it has created this imbalance where in reality, patients should be in charge of their healthcare money and their healthcare decisions. Doctors are supposed to be here more as a support and a guide. And you've had the imbalance for a very long time. But I do feel that direct primary care is type of a place where you can kind of shift this, where the patient becomes one who is in charge of their healthcare money and along with the doctor makes his healthcare decisions.
Yeah, that sounds like an improvement over the current arrangement that most people have. Can you tell us how much of this kind of stuff is going on in the country? How unique is your practice?
Well, there are doctors, especially in family medicine. You can go to it's a map. I always forget. dpcfrontier.com, I believe. But you can look up, there's a map that will list DPC doctors along in the United States. You can find specialists who are also doing direct care. So it's kind of growing. I believe it will continue growing, especially as patients are leaving the system. So I think it's a great model. It's really good.
Yeah, I agree with you. It sounds like something that people should really look into for sure. Now, let me ask you, you're very outspoken in general. You appear on X Spaces and you're very involved. I've noticed. What are some of your primary focuses and concerns at this very moment?
Um, you know, we're doing a lot of kind of state initiatives, making sure that states are passing good laws and allowing patients and parents to be protected, make sure that, people are in charge of their healthcare decisions. Um, I personally like working specifically on direct primary care legislature because I feel that that's a way to create more of a balance where patient is in charge. Patient Bill of Rights is also something that needs to be passed in the states, Parent Bill of Rights as well. So there's a lot of things that we can do to make sure that consumer is protected.
Yeah, I think it's great, the time that you take to educate the public and to share your knowledge and information. I think it's really commendable. And I would love, since you do have Croatian roots, could you give us sort of an update from Europe a little bit? What's your perspective about some of what's happening in Europe? For example, I talked about this as well with my previous guests, but we have this immigration issue that's gone on. And one thing that I'd like to point out about the whole immigration discussion, which I haven't heard anybody else particularly point out, is that the Biden administration at no point, and again, maybe I'm completely wrong and someone just hasn't sent me the video yet, but the Biden administration at no point explained their open borders policy. They just did it, as far as I could tell. They never made some speech saying, well, look, borders are overrated. Let people come into the country. We need a higher population and a better workforce and more cultural influences. And I mean, there wasn't even a speech. They just did it. And it seems to be what happened in Europe as well. I mean, they just started opening the borders and no one went to a podium anywhere to really explain what the policy is. And then, I'm very much against the concept of demonizing immigrants. I'm not even really particularly fond of like the term illegal alien per se. But the fact of the matter is, the way I look at it is, if you just start flooding people into any city or town or whatever, even if 1 out of 1,000 people is not a good person, well, 1 out of 1,000 people is a rapist. 1 out of 1,000 people is an arsonist, is a thief. And if you already have cities where there's high crime rates, where there's a reduced quality of life, we just don't have the capacity to provide services and accommodations for just millions and millions of people. So what are some of your thoughts as an immigrant yourself and as a person who has, probably more awareness of what's happening in Europe than the average person? What are some of your thoughts about what we've seen in terms of this mass migration into various Western countries, as they're called?
Well, it's actually really simple. I believe that if you're not legally in United States or any other country, you shouldn't be here. And I'm glad that President Trump closed the border and that they are deporting illegal aliens to their countries of origins. It took me several years, I believe it was 8 years to become a citizen. It was a very interesting and long process. But I chose to be part of this country and I assimilated into it. Obviously I speak English. I went to medical school here and all that. But you have migrants coming from a lot of other places that are illegally here and they don't even want to learn the language and they're using the resources that would better be spent on veterans, homeless, and other populations in need. As far as Europe is concerned, they have the issue of migration. In their case, many times was actually legal migration. Some of their countries opened the borders to a lot of these immigrants, and some of it is illegal. But now they're kind of stuck with not knowing what to do with it. and they have increased crimes and things like that. The other issue that Europe is dealing with is digital passport. EU is very much still trying to have control over its citizens and try to push for digital passports. Now, Americans, when they go to Europe, they need to have a visa. When you fly to England, you also need a visa that's actually not too hard to get. You just do it online. But there are a lot of these roadblocks trying to get legal people to come, they're making it harder for us to go over there. And they're putting very much this control mechanism in place for their citizens. But they are struggling with immigration, and they will continue struggling.
Right. Now, I know you've made it clear in this interview and elsewhere that you're a believer in the free market system. And I know you are in no way a proponent of socialism or communism, and you have experience with these alternative philosophies, if you will, coming from Croatia and living now in the United States. So, I not to get into my own political feelings or philosophies or whatever, but I live here in New York City, as you know, and I'm seeing a lot of social decay that seemed to be augmented as a result of COVID. It seemed like more and more vagrancy. A friend of mine came to New York who's from New York but lives in Georgia, and they were back in New York for the first time in years. And they noticed that there's more young people on the streets than they ever remembered. It used to be kind of homeless veterans and older people.
Problem is
Well,
the
I can't,
rhetoric
yeah,
hearing, you
I
know.
couldn't hear you.
No, I was just saying the problem is the rhetorics they're hearing from influencers, where they're hearing how socialism is better and you need to take care of people, but no one really looks at the root problem of what happens once the government gets involved and it actually decides who, when, and where receives help. And always the question is who's going to pay for it at the end? No one wants to answer that question. The other thing that I think is becoming a problem is even for people on the right. You go from this MAGA to America first, now to America only. I hear people in spaces talk about how no one that was not born in the United States should hold an office. Well, you have people like myself who are legal immigrants to this country. I've been naturalized citizens since 2004, so 21 years. And according to some of those people, I should not hold an office. But then my answer or question back to them is, what have you done to actually hold an office or participate in your community? I've been on a school board before, I'm on a school board now, and I've held many positions within medical associations and other places. So there's a lot of noise out there, and I think people shouldn't necessarily ignore it, but they should be aware of it and realize that we should put America first, especially when it comes to the issues that we have at home. But you have to be careful because there are a lot of geopolitical reasons why certain things are done certain way. And I love listening to people who have no idea what they're talk about problems and just keep on piling it up. And my answer back to them is always get involved within your own community, run for an office, or help during the elections, or write letters or whatever. And then you can have this conversation. We're becoming a little bit too closed. And I do worry about the way the whole country is moving.
Yeah. So I would like to ask you in terms of um, putting the ideals of socialism or whatever aside and just looking at the reality of what we see when we walk down the street. If I see, I live on 130th Street. If I walk 5 blocks to the train station, which is on 125th Street, it's going to resemble what my grandfather used to say, which is that we live in an open air asylum. I mean, there's a lot of mental illness, there's a lot of homelessness, there are a lot of folks who at this point, you could just look at them and say, how could you possibly help these people? I mean, what can be done about people who have completely destroyed their lives with drugs? They have no family that can take care of them. I guess you could look at that person and try to be compassionate and look at it from a humanistic point of view and say, oh, that's a human soul and we should care for every person. Or you could say, look, I don't have the wherewithal monetarily, spiritually, to care for another person. But then there's just the simple fact of, well, whether you feel for the other person or not, your quality of life is being reduced. So, I mean, economic theories, political philosophies, and theories aside, what can we do about all these people who have fallen in the cracks, so to speak, who they're not running a business and they're not going to open a business anytime soon?
You can't do anything if they don't want to be helped. They have to want to be helped. And some of them don't want to ask for help. And I prefer to go into shelters because they don't want to get off drugs. They don't want to get off alcohol. They don't want to go through that hard work. But then you have others who do want it and they cannot find resources to do it. So there's definitely an imbalance. There are many programs out there that are very good at doing this and solving this. And I think we need to leave it to programs like that to come up with solutions and not for the government to do it. Because once government gets involved, they just become this big elephant that keeps on draining the resources and becomes more of a corrupted way of doing things.
Yeah. The term Kafkaesque comes to mind.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I kind of need to get going. My phone keeps on blowing with messages.
Yeah.
It's that
Okay, so yeah, I thank you for the time that you spent here today, Dr. Lindley. Can you just give us some quick info in terms of where people can follow you and how people can keep track of your efforts?
I am mainly on X under KL Veritas. I do sometimes speak in spaces. I also am director of the Fellows for the Independent Medical Alliance. So definitely follow Independent Medical Alliance on X. There are many doctors who are doing some amazing work. So follow us there, and that's really it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Lindley. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I really admire all the hard work that you do and all the wisdom that you impart on so many people who really benefit from your insights. So keep up the great work. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a great day.